In addition to the different types of listening that we can engage in, we can also use different listening styles. And generally speaking, you probably lean towards one or the other of these listening styles, but we can also change our listening style based on the context that we are in. So we can be people-oriented listeners, action-oriented listeners, content-oriented listeners, and time-oriented listeners. Let's talk first about people-oriented listeners. People-oriented listeners are mainly concerned about the needs and feelings of others and are often seen as the supporters. These listeners may get distracted from a specific task or the content of a message in order to address the feelings that are happening in the message. So, to put it in other words, they are mostly concerned about the emotional states of others. These types of listeners tend to be the ones who will just lend an ear and simply listen to what the other person is saying and try to assess what the other person is saying and how that contributes to what the other person is feeling in that moment. You might be an action-oriented listener. Action-oriented listeners take a message from a what can I do approach, and these tend to be the builders, because action-oriented listeners try to formulate an organized way to initiate whatever action it is that they see the speaker as wanting. So these speakers tend to prefer really well-organized and precise and accurate pieces of information, and they can become frustrated with communication that they perceive to be unorganized or inconsistent, or if they see that a speaker is being too long-winded. So action-oriented listeners really just want something to do. Content-oriented listeners are listening in order to understand and evaluate the content of a message, and these are often known as the learners. Now, content-oriented listeners are also trying to listen to the message from multiple perspectives before they draw their conclusions. So they like really in-depth information and like to learn about as many sides of a topic as they can so that they can formulate a complete picture of the content that they are being presented with. And finally, we could potentially be time-oriented listeners. Time-oriented listeners are concerned with completing tasks and achieving specific goals. These listeners are often seen as the executives. So they don't tend to like information that they perceive to be irrelevant, and they like to stick to a particular timeline. Time-oriented listeners might also actually verbalize the time constraints under which they are operating. They might say to you, for example, sure, I can talk, but I only have about 5 minutes, in order to communicate to you that you need to get right to the point right now if you want your message to be heard. So as I said earlier, we probably lean towards one or the other of these different listening styles, but we can also change our listening style based on the content that we are in, and we can engage in multiple listening styles simultaneously as well.